governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, now running for president. Good morning, Governor. Welcome back.
Hey, Hugh. How you doing?
I am great. I want to begin with your announcement. Last time I talked to you, you hadn't announced. Now you have announced. In your announcement, you promised to reconstitutionalize the government. My ears perked up. What do you mean by that, Governor?
Well, Hugh, you know our founders created 3 branches of government. They did not create a 4th branch, an administrative state that is unaccountable to the electorate, and yet that's what's developed over many, many decades. A lot of the most important policies that are decided, what kind of car you can drive, what kind of energy you can use, are decided not even by your elected representatives, but by nameless, faceless bureaucrats in the bowels of Washington, D.C. So we are going to be revoking all of those Biden policies through the bureaucracy. But we're also going to identify, why do we have things like weaponization of agencies? And I think the Founding Fathers would have predicted exactly what's happened when you don't have adequate constitutional accountability over these agencies. Power is going to accumulate and power will be abused. And so if you look at something like the DOJ and the FBI, I mean, we see examples of 20 FBI agents storming a pro-life advocate's home at 6 in the morning who had already said he would appear voluntarily. We see parents going to school board meetings being surveilled by the FBI under Merrick Garland. They're even identifying Catholics as somehow a big problem. And so I think the weaponization is rooted in this lack of accountability. We are going to end the weaponization, but the only way you can end the weaponization is to bring accountability. And that means, of course, a new director of the FBI, cleaning house and all those agencies, and using the full scope of Article 2 power to bring the bureaucracy to heel. I don't buy this idea that the president cannot remove a, quote, career person. When they're abusing power and they're going outside of what is appropriate, they absolutely should be terminated and terminated swiftly. So we're going to be doing that. I think we're going to do it in a big way.
Now, Governor, the last job I had in the federal government was as the acting director of the Office of Personnel Management. It is pretty freaking hard to fire anybody. It's really hard to move anybody. The Merit System Protection Board gets involved. It is not the military. How would you get control of this massive, sprawling federal bureaucracy, which has become actually 2 governments, one for the left and one for the rest of us?
Well, I think the assertion of Article 2 power in ways that maybe have not been done, I think needs to be done. I think this current Supreme Court would view some of the bureaucracy that you cited in those restrictions as potentially impinging on Article 2 authority to actually run the executive branch. And so we will assert that. We will also reduce the footprint of all these agencies, but particularly DOJ and FBI within D.C. By at least 50%. I mean, I think if you look at something like the FBI, you have a politicized culture that's developed within Washington, D.C. at headquarters, and I think it's totally toxic to the rule of law. And so taking that and saying we're going to radically reduce that size, we're going to do more on the field offices, I think would be a big deal. But we're also going to refocus functions of things like federal law enforcement. I mean, they should not be doing things like policing speech on social media or trying to crack down on so-called misinformation. They should focus on the rising crime in urban areas. They should focus on the CCP's influence in our society, the drug cartels, which are killing tens of thousands of Americans, human trafficking, all these things that are really the core functions. We need to reorient the federal law enforcement on doing that. But I do think, and then taking some of these agencies and making sure they're actually doing the things that we would want. So, for example, like the Civil Rights Division. Our Civil Rights Division in Justice will do all discrimination. Yes, of course, you don't discriminate against a racial minority, but you also have to look at corporate America, government, academia, how they are wielding things like DEI in a discriminatory manner against other people. And so we will say no tolerance for discrimination of all kind, regardless of whether you're in the majority or in the minority.
Now, in terms of the judges that you will bring to bear on this, former President Trump hit 3 home runs with his Supreme Court appointments. Are you going to make the same kind of pledge to the Republicans as you go around the country that your judges will be like the Trump judges?
Well, actually, I would say we'll do better than that. I mean, I respect the 3 appointees he did, but none of those 3 are at the same level of Justices Thomas and Justice Alito. I think they are the gold standard, and so my justices will be along the lines of a Sam Alito and a Clarence Thomas. In Florida, I inherited a very liberal state Supreme Court, maybe the most liberal in the country, very activist, but I was able to replace 3 of the 4 liberals my first month in office with conservative justices. I've since been able to make a number of appointments since then, so we now have the most conservative state Supreme Court in the country. And so I think we have a really good track record on doing that. And in fact, 2 of my Supreme Court picks when I first year in office were elevated to the 11th Circuit by President Donald Trump.
So I've already played for the audience many times your speech in North Carolina about one rule of law, but we have two systems of justice in America. It reminded me of Disraeli talking about 2 Englands, and I saw Lindsey Graham go nuclear on George Stephanopoulos yesterday because no one was talking about Hillary Clinton in the context of the Trump indictment. Do you think legacy media will ever fairly cover things just as simple as John Kerry dealing with the Iranians during the time that President Trump was in office and not getting prosecuted, Hillary Clinton's server not getting prosecuted, but Donald Trump getting prosecuted? Do you think there will be a legacy media fairness in the approach to these stories?
Of course not. They have an agenda. They become increasingly shrill and partisan, and they are going to advance the agenda that they want to advance. Look, Hugh, I was in Congress when the Hillary thing happened, and what I was able to say, I think that everyone agreed with, was as a naval officer, if I had done what she had done, I would have been court-martialed very, very quickly. There would have been no question about that. And I think the thing that bugs me to this day about what happened with Hillary was, yes, the Comey non-prosecution decision was bad, but there was zero prosecutorial zeal to investigate all this stuff. I mean, it was basically a kid glove treatment. They delegated a lot of the investigation to Hillary's own aides. It was a total joke. And so I think when you talk about 2 standards of justice, if you have extraordinary zeal on one side and then a complete indifference and a lack of zeal on the other, that's a huge imbalance. And I think that's something that we'll certainly rectify when I become president. But it is glaring, and I think people see that. And just think about some of the stuff that we've seen with so you mentioned the court. You have these crazed lunatics that are out there threatening the Supreme Court justices at their home. That's in violation of federal law, and yet the Garland Justice Department turns a blind eye to it. I think, and I think you would agree, if different protesters were in front of the liberal justices' homes, I think they would act very, very quickly.
Oh, I see the narrative always moving to cover one side of a story. We still do not have the statement of the Nashville shooter, her manifesto. And I wonder, does that disturb you that there seems to be 2 standards for reporting even violent crime like that?
No, not only 2 standards. I think that there's a concerted effort to suppress facts that conflict with the overall narrative. And so this Nashville shooter does not fit the narrative. If anybody ever does anything like that, what does the corporate press want? They want to be able to tag this in a way that they can stick it to conservatives and blame conservatives for why this happens. Now, it usually doesn't work out that way, and so they got to kind of try to run interference about that. But yes, not only are they not telling the truth, they're actively suppressing the truth about a lot of these issues. And I think that's the problem I see with corporate media more so than maybe 20 years ago. There was always a liberal bias. I mean, you know that, I know that. But I think the elevation of narrative above all else and the ignorance of facts or even the suppression of facts that conflict with the narrative has just become standard practice. And so when you have any of these, I don't have any hope that it will be reported fairly. You just assume that they're going to continue with the same playbook.
Would President DeSantis have bailed out SVB Bank? Because I think that's another example of the double standard at work in America. President Biden said no bailout on Friday. It was bailed out on Sunday after Silicon Valley worked the phones. Would you have bailed out SVB?
No, of course not. So SVB, these are very sophisticated depositors. This is servicing a lot of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. These people are wealthy. They're smart. They made the decision to put money into those accounts in excess of the insured limits. And here's what I can tell you, Hugh. They were politically connected. They were not, quote, systemically important in terms of the overall economy. if a bank in, say, Iowa that service farmers had the exact same problems, do you think there is any chance that that bank in Iowa would have been bailed out? I would say the chance of that would have been zero.
I agree. I want to close with the Chinese Communist Party. Chairman Gallagher was just on. And of course, you know the armed services. You're the only veteran running for the office. What do you think will happen if China attacks Taiwan under President Biden?
I think it will not end well. I think that Biden has really reduced our deterrent capacity in the Pacific. We should be bolstering that. I think we also need to look in Florida, we've actually taken action against CCP influence. We nixed Confucius Institutes and our institutes of higher education. We also just prohibited CCC land purchases in the state of Florida, particularly the farmland and land near military bases. And so I think we got to do way more to combat CCP influence at home. I think we got to do more to build economic resilience of our country. We were never intertwined economically with the Soviet Union during the Cold War the way we are with the Chinese Communist Party. And I think it's made our country weaker as a result. But we absolutely, and Mike Gallagher and I talk about this, we need to have a Pacific-focused national security strategy where we have a commitment to expanding our naval capability. Japan is building up their military for the first time in memory. They're actually getting along with the South Koreans. They never get along, and yet they're getting along because they see the threat posed by the CCP. And of course, we need to work with India and Australia. So building a strong deterrent capability, I think, is going to be order one for national security in the Pacific for the next president of the United States. I'm just hoping we can get there before we see disaster strike.
We got 1 minute, Governor. Last question. You get one big swing in your first year as president, and President Trump missed when he went for his first big swing on repealing Obamacare. He hit the second one on the tax cut. What would Ron DeSantis' first big swing under reconciliation, where you need simple majority in the Senate, be on?
It's going to be more than just one, because Biden expanded reconciliation. They dumped a lot of stuff. So we're already going through what can we all put in there. Obviously, we're going to shut down the border. We're going to do the border security. That is just point one. We've got to get that done. Two, we are going to repeal Biden's disastrous economic policies, his Green New Deal, and we're going to have things that are going to help jumpstart this economy, things like full expensing so that we have more ability to produce manufacturing. But we are going to have a huge package for reconciliation. It's going to cover a lot of different things.
Governor Ron DeSantis, keep coming back. Thank you for joining me.